Some people think courage is something you're born with, that it's a fire that burns bright from the first breath. But I learned differently one scorching afternoon, watching a 16-year-old girl teach 3 bullies a lesson they'd never forget. This isn't about superheroes or movie magic. This is about what happens when someone pushes too far, hurts the wrong person, and discovers that quiet strength can be the most dangerous kind of all. The asphalt shimmered under the relentless afternoon heat at Riverside Academy, waves of warmth rising from the cracked parking lot like ghosts. It was that strange hour after final bell when most students had already scattered home, leaving behind only stragglers waiting for rides, athletes heading to practice, and those who simply had nowhere better to be. The air hung thick and heavy, carrying the mingled scents of cut grass, exhaust fumes, and the faint sweetness of someone's forgotten juice box baking in the sun. Among the scattered groups of teenagers, an 11-year-old boy named Ethan made his way across the lot with careful, measured steps. He was small, achingly so for his age, with a frame that seemed almost fragile beneath the oversized backpack strapped to his narrow shoulders. The bag bulged with textbooks and binders, pulling at him with each step, making him lean forward slightly as he walked. His brown eyes, wide and expressive, swept the parking lot in quick, nervous glances, always watching, always wary. He'd learned to be that way over the past several months. Ethan wasn't supposed to be afraid of school. He'd always loved learning, loved the smell of new pencils and the satisfaction of solving a difficult math problem. But lately, school had become something else entirely. A minefield where he had to navigate carefully, choosing his routes with precision, timing his movements to avoid certain people at certain times. His sister Maya always told him it would get better, that bullies eventually grew bored and moved on. But it had been a year now, and they hadn't gotten bored. If anything, they'd gotten worse. He headed toward his usual waiting spot, a section of chain-link fence near the back corner of the lot where his sister would pick him up after her club meetings ended. The spot was partially hidden by an old dumpster and a cluster of scraggly trees that the school kept promising to trim, making it both a refuge and, unfortunately, a trap. It was away from the main flow of students, away from teachers' watchful eyes, away from help. His sneakers scuffed against the pavement, the sound seeming too loud in his own ears. He could hear laughter nearby, the particular kind of laughter that made his stomach clench tight. He didn't want to look. Maybe if he didn't look, if he just kept walking, they wouldn't notice him today. Maybe they'd found someone else to torment. Maybe, well, look who we have here. The voice cut through his desperate hope like a blade through paper. Ethan's footsteps faltered, his grip tightening on the straps of his backpack until his knuckles went white. He knew that voice, Derek. Tall, athletic Derek with his expensive sneakers and carefully styled hair, the kind of kid who seemed to glide through school on charm and confidence while leaving destruction in his wake. Ethan kept walking, his heart hammering against his ribs. Maybe if he pretended not to hear, if he just made it to the fence. "Hey! I'm talking to you, little man." Footsteps behind him, moving faster than his own. Then 3 figures appeared in his peripheral vision, spreading out to block his path. Derek stood in the center, flanked by his constant companions. Brandon, shorter but stockier with a cruel smile that never quite reached his eyes, and Tyler, lanky and nervous, the kind of kid who laughed too loud at jokes he didn't quite understand. Desperate to belong, Ethan stopped walking. There was nowhere to go. The fence was still 20 feet away, and they had him surrounded. His breathing quickened, shallow pants that he tried to control, remembering what Maya always told him. "Breathe deep, Ethan." Fear feeds on quick breaths and racing hearts. "Slow it down. You're stronger than you think." But Maya wasn't here yet. She was still in her student council meeting, or maybe heading to her locker, unaware that her little brother was standing in a parking lot with 3 boys who'd made his life miserable for the past year. "Where are you running off to so fast?" Derek stepped closer, his shadow falling across Ethan's face. At 15, he towered over the younger boy, using his height like a weapon. "We just want to talk, that's all. Just have a friendly conversation." Brandon snickered, circling around to Ethan's left. "Yeah, friendly. We're friendly guys, right, Derek?" "The friendliest," Derek confirmed, his smile widening. "So why don't you stick around? Tell us about your day. You have a good day at school, Ethan." Ethan's throat felt tight, his voice trapped somewhere deep in his chest. He managed a small nod, his eyes darting between the three of them, looking for an opening, an escape route, anything. "That's good, that's real good." Derek reached out suddenly, his hand shooting forward to shove Ethan's shoulder. The push wasn't hard enough to knock him down, but it was enough to make him stumble backward, his backpack shifting awkwardly on his shoulders. "See? We're just talking. Nothing wrong with that, right?" Tyler giggled nervously, bouncing on the balls of his feet. Just talking, just talking." "Although," Derek continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone, "I gotta say, that's a pretty heavy bag you got there. What's in it? Bricks? You carrying bricks to school, little man?" Before Ethan could respond, Brandon lunged forward and grabbed the backpack straps, yanking them down with enough force to pull Ethan off balance. The boy stumbled, arms windmilling, barely catching himself before he fell. Brandon pulled harder, and the backpack slipped free, hitting the pavement with a heavy thud. "Let's see what we got here," Brandon announced, dropping to his knees and unzipping the main compartment. He dumped the contents onto the concrete with theatrical flair, textbooks and notebooks spilling out in a cascade of paper and fabric. Pencils rolled across the pavement. A calculator bounced and skittered away. Loose papers caught the breeze and began to scatter. "No!" The word escaped Ethan's lips before he could stop it, high and desperate. He dropped to his knees, scrambling to gather his belongings, his hands shaking as he tried to grab papers before they blew away. "Please, that's my homework, I need—" Derek's foot came down on Ethan's English notebook, pinning it to the pavement. The sole of his expensive sneaker pressed down hard, grinding the cover into the concrete. "What's the magic word, little man?" Ethan looked up at him, his vision blurring with tears he refused to let fall. Maya's voice echoed in his head, strong and steady. "Never cry for them, Ethan. Tears are precious. Don't waste them on people who enjoy your pain." "Please," Ethan whispered, hating how small his voice sounded, how weak. "Please, I need that for class tomorrow." "Please," Derek repeated in a high-pitched, mocking voice that made Brandon and Tyler laugh. "Did you hear that?" The baby said, "Please." How polite, how sweet. His foot pressed down harder, and Ethan heard the horrible sound of pages tearing. "But you know what? I don't think you said it right. Try again." Brandon kicked Ethan's math textbook, sending it skidding across the parking lot. "Yeah, try again, with feeling this time." Tyler, emboldened by the others, grabbed one of Ethan's notebooks and held it up, waving it tauntingly. "Maybe we should help him with his homework. I bet we could write some real interesting stuff in here." Ethan tried to stand, tried to reach for his things, but Derek shoved him back down. The pavement was hot against his palms, tiny pieces of gravel biting into his skin. His knee scraped against the concrete, and he felt the sharp sting of broken skin, the warm trickle of blood running down his shin. "Stay down there," Derek commanded, his voice hardening. "That's where you belong, isn't it? On your knees, begging." The laughter surrounded him, cruel and cutting. Brandon had opened one of his notebooks now, reading aloud in an exaggerated voice, "My hero is my dad because he taught me to be brave and kind." Oh man, this is golden. Little Ethan's hero is his daddy. Something twisted in Ethan's chest at those words. His father had passed away 3 years ago, a sudden heart attack that had shattered their family. His dad had been everything Derek said, brave, kind, strong. He'd been the one who started teaching Maya martial arts when she was just 6 years old, who'd shown them both that true strength wasn't about hurting others, but protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. "Give that back," Ethan said, his voice trembling but louder now. "That's personal." "Personal?" Brandon looked at Derek with exaggerated surprise. "Did you hear that? It's personal. Well, excuse me, Your Majesty." He ripped the page out of the notebook, the tearing sound making Ethan flinch. "Stop it!" Ethan lurched forward, reaching for the paper, but Tyler stuck his foot out, tripping him. Ethan went down hard, his palms scraping across the rough pavement, new pain blooming across his hands to join the ache in his knee. "Or did the baby fall down?" Tyler taunted, his earlier nervousness replaced by growing confidence. There was something intoxicating about power, even borrowed power, even cruel power. "Need help getting up?" Derek crouched down beside Ethan, his face close enough that the younger boy could smell mint gum and cheap cologne. "Here's the thing," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You're going to pick up this mess, and then you're going to go home and tell nobody about this. Because if you do, if you tell a teacher or your mommy or anyone, we're going to make things so much worse for you, understand?" Ethan's hands were shaking as he reached for his torn notebook, his scattered pencils, his ruined homework. Blood smeared across the pages from his scraped palms. His vision swam with unshed tears, his throat tight with humiliation and helplessness. He thought of his father, of the last conversation they'd had before he died. They'd been watching an old martial arts movie together, and his dad had paused it to tell him something important. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, son," his father had said, his hand warm on Ethan's shoulder. "It's feeling that fear, acknowledging it, and still choosing to do what's right. Sometimes courage looks like fighting, sometimes it looks like walking away. Sometimes it just looks like getting back up one more time than you've been knocked down." Ethan tried to hold on to those words now, tried to find that courage his father had talked about. But it was so hard when his hands were bleeding and his notebook was torn, and 3 older boys stood over him laughing like his pain was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. He was reaching for his calculator when Derek's foot came down on it, the crunch of plastic shattering filling the air. "Oops," Derek said, grinning. "My bad." That was when the shadow fell across them. It stretched long and dark across the pavement, cutting through the cluster of boys like a blade. The temperature seemed to drop despite the afternoon heat, and something in the air changed, became charged with a tension that made the hair on the back of Ethan's neck stand up. Maya was 16 years old and carried herself with a grace that most people mistook for gentleness. She stood 5'8", with deep brown skin that glowed in the sunlight, and dark hair woven into tight braids that she kept pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore simple clothes, faded jeans, and a navy hoodie despite the heat, clothing that hid the lean muscle built from years of disciplined training. But it was her eyes that people noticed most, dark and intense and impossibly steady, the kind of gaze that seemed to see straight through pretense and posturing to the truth underneath. She didn't run toward them. She didn't shout or make a scene. She simply walked forward with measured, purposeful steps, each movement economical and controlled. Her backpack hung from one shoulder, and her hands were loose at her sides, relaxed in a way that somehow felt more threatening than if she'd come in with fists clenched. The bullies noticed her immediately. How could they not? There was something about Maya's presence that demanded attention, that filled space in a way that had nothing to do with size or volume. Brandon was the first to react, his laughter cutting off mid-cackle. "Oh, hey, Maya." Derek straightened up, removing his foot from Ethan's calculator, trying to recover his earlier swagger. "Well, if it isn't Big Sister come to save the day." Maya ignored him completely. She walked past Derek as if he were invisible, as if he were nothing more than furniture in her way, and crouched down beside her brother. Her hand touched his shoulder gently, her voice soft and warm, and completely at odds with the cold fury Ethan could feel radiating from her. "Hey, little brother, you okay?" Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. Up close, he could see the tightness around Maya's eyes, the barely contained anger in the set of her jaw, but her hands on his shoulders were gentle as she helped him to his feet, careful of his scraped knee and bleeding palms. "They hurt you," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I'm okay," Ethan managed, though his voice cracked on the words. Maya's eyes swept over his torn notebook, his scattered belongings, his shattered calculator. She saw the blood on his palms, the scrape on his knee, the tear tracks he'd tried to hide. Her expression didn't change, but something in the air around her seemed to crystallize, become sharp and dangerous. She stood slowly, rising to her full height, and finally turned her attention to Derek. The change in her was subtle but unmistakable. Her stance shifted slightly, weight balanced evenly on both feet, shoulders squared, chin level. To most people, she would have looked simply alert. But to anyone who'd trained in martial arts, the signs were clear. She was ready. "Move back," she said quietly. Derek laughed, though there was a hint of uncertainty in it now. "Or what? You think because you take some little karate classes you can tell me what to do? This is between me and your baby brother. Stay out of it." "Those are your final words." "My final—" Derek's bravado was cracking now, confusion bleeding into his voice. "What are you even talking about? You think you're scary. You're just a girl who—" Maya moved. One moment she was standing 3 feet away, the next she had closed the distance, her hand snapping out to catch Derek's wrist before he even realized she'd moved. The grip was precise, her fingers finding pressure points her father had taught her years ago, applying just enough force to send pain shooting up Derek's arm without causing permanent damage. His gasp of shock echoed across the parking lot. In a fluid motion that spoke of years of practice, thousands of hours of repetition, until the movements became as natural as breathing, Maya pivoted her hips and twisted Derek's arm, using his own momentum against him. His knees buckled, his body following the path of least resistance as she controlled his descent. Within 2 seconds of her initial movement, Derek was on his knees, his arm locked in a submission hold that made any resistance impossible without risking a dislocated shoulder. "Listen very carefully," Maya said, her voice calm and level and absolutely terrifying in its control. "You touched my brother. You made him bleed. You destroyed his things and laughed while he tried to pick them up. Do you understand how angry that makes me?" Derek tried to pull away, but the slightest pressure from Maya's hand sent fresh waves of pain through his arm. "Let go! You're crazy! Let go of me!" Brandon took a step forward, hands raised in what might have been aggression or might have been shock. "Hey, you can't just—" Maya released Derek and shifted her stance in one smooth motion, turning to face Brandon while maintaining perfect balance. Her hands came up in a traditional guard position, and suddenly it wasn't just movement anymore. It was a statement. Years of training in karate, taekwondo, judo, all flowing together into a style that was uniquely hers. Her father had started teaching her when she was 6, and after he died, she'd thrown herself into the training with renewed intensity, honoring his memory through every kata, every drill, every moment of sweat and discipline. The watching students had started to gather now, drawn by some 6th sense that told them something important was happening. Phones appeared, cameras pointing, whispers spreading like wildfire. Maya didn't care about the audience. Her focus was absolute, divided equally between the 3 boys who'd hurt her brother and Ethan himself, making sure he was safe. "I'm giving you all one chance," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "Pick up every single thing that belongs to my brother. Apologize for what you did, and walk away. That's it. That's the only offer you get." Derek climbed to his feet, cradling his sore arm, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. You think you're tough? You think just because you know some martial arts BS you can push us around? There's 3 of us and 1 of you. Maya's expression didn't change. I know. Tyler, who'd been hanging back, spoke up nervously. Come on, guys. Maybe we should just... Shut up, Tyler, Derek snapped. He turned back to Maya, trying to summon his earlier confidence, but his voice shook slightly. You want to fight? Fine. Let's see how tough you really are. The parking lot had gone quiet now, the gathered students watching with wide eyes and bated breath. Someone whispered, "This is going to be bad," though it wasn't clear who they thought it would be bad for. Ethan wanted to shout for his sister to stop, to just walk away, to not risk getting in trouble for him. But he knew Maya well enough to know that look in her eyes. She'd made her decision. These boys had crossed a line, and she was going to make sure they understood exactly what that meant. Maya took a slow breath, her body relaxing even further. To the untrained eye, she looked almost casual, unprepared, but Ethan had watched her train countless times. He knew what that relaxation meant. It meant she was ready for anything. Last chance, she said quietly. Pick up his things. Apologize. Leave. Derek's answer was to lunge forward, his fist swinging wide in a haymaker punch that had all his weight behind it, but no technique, no control, no discipline. Maya sidestepped the blow as easily as if she were avoiding a falling leaf, her body flowing around the attack with minimal effort. Her counter was instant and precise, a palm strike to Derek's solar plexus that drove the air from his lungs and sent him staggering backward, gasping. Brandon charged from the side, trying to grab her in a tackle, but Maya had already pivoted, using his momentum to hip-toss him over her center of gravity. He hit the pavement hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Tyler froze, his eyes wide with shock, all thoughts of joining the fight evaporating in an instant. Derek, still wheezing but furious now, came at her again, this time more carefully. He feinted left, then swung right, trying to use his size advantage. But Maya read the feint easily, blocking the actual strike with her forearm and countering with a low kick to his lead leg that buckled his knee. As he dropped, she caught him with a controlled elbow strike to the shoulder that had him crying out in pain without causing serious injury. Brandon was back on his feet now, circling warily, having learned that charging straight in was a mistake. He tried to coordinate with Derek, the 2 of them moving to flank her on either side. Maya's response was to step backward toward the fence, controlling the angle so they couldn't surround her. Her movements were economic, efficient, never wasting energy on flashy techniques or unnecessary flourishes. This wasn't a movie. This was real combat, and she approached it with the same disciplined precision her father had taught her. When they rushed her together, she dropped low, sweeping Brandon's legs out from under him, while simultaneously redirecting Derek's momentum past her with a simple deflection. They collided with each other in a tangle of limbs, cursing and scrambling. "Stop!" Tyler shouted, his voice cracking. "Just stop! This is crazy." But Derek wasn't listening. His pride was wounded worse than his body, and pride made people stupid. He grabbed one of Ethan's textbooks from the ground and hurled it at Maya's face. She caught it one-handed without even looking particularly impressed, her eyes never leaving Derek's face. "Really?" she asked, her voice heavy with disappointment. "That's your strategy?" The gathered crowd was murmuring now, phones still recording, everyone processing what they were witnessing. This wasn't a fight, it was a demonstration. Maya wasn't just defending herself, she was teaching a lesson. Brandon tried once more, attempting to grab her from behind while Derek distracted her from the front. But Maya had been training in judo since she was 8 years old. Grappling was as natural to her as breathing. She shifted her weight, broke Brandon's grip with a simple wrist release, and threw him over her hip in a textbook ippon-sioinage that would have made her sensei proud. He landed hard but safely, the technique controlled enough not to injure, but convincing enough to discourage further attempts. Derek stood alone now, breathing hard, his expensive clothes dusty and torn, his carefully styled hair a mess. The other two boys were down, not seriously hurt, but thoroughly defeated, their enthusiasm for bullying thoroughly crushed. Maya stepped forward, and Derek actually flinched. "I trained my whole life for this," Maya said quietly, though her voice carried across the silent parking lot. "Not to show off, not to look cool, but to protect people who can't protect themselves. To stop people like you from hurting people like my brother." She gestured to the scattered belongings still on the ground. "Now, pick up every single thing. Every pencil, every piece of paper, every broken piece of his calculator that you destroyed. Apologize and walk away. This is the last time I'm offering." Derek looked at his friends, both still on the ground, neither making any move to get up or continue fighting. He looked at the crowd of students, all watching him, with expressions ranging from shock to satisfaction to schadenfreude. He looked at Maya, standing calm and controlled and utterly undefeated, not even breathing hard. And finally, he dropped to his knees and started picking up Ethan's things. Brandon and Tyler joined him after a moment, the three of them gathering scattered papers and broken pencils in silence. When they'd collected everything into a pile, Derek held it out to Ethan with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," he muttered, barely audible. "Louder," Maya said softly, "and look at him when you say it." Derek raised his eyes to meet Ethan's, and the younger boy was shocked to see what looked like actual fear there. "I'm sorry for everything. It won't happen again." "It better not," Maya said, her voice carrying a promise and a warning all at once. "Because if I hear that you've so much as looked at my brother wrong, if you've bothered him or anyone else who can't defend themselves, I will find out. And next time, I won't be so gentle, understand?" Derek nodded frantically, and the three bullies backed away slowly before turning and practically running for the parking lot exit. The gathered crowd erupted in whispers and excited chatter, phones still recording, the story already spreading through social media before the participants had even left the scene. Maya didn't pay attention to any of it. She turned to her brother, her expression softening instantly, all the warrior intensity melting away to reveal the caring older sister underneath. "Come on," she said gently, taking the pile of recovered belongings and carefully placing them back in Ethan's backpack. "Let's get you home and clean up those scrapes." Ethan threw his arms around her waist, hugging her tight, and she held him close, one hand stroking his hair. "You okay?" she murmured. "I am now," he whispered back. Then, pulling back slightly to look up at her face, "Maya, thank you for always protecting me." She smiled, and it transformed her face, made her look like the 16-year-old girl she was, rather than the warrior she'd had to become. "That's what family does, little brother. Dad taught us both that. We look out for each other. Always." As they walked toward the parking lot exit together, Maya's arm around Ethan's shoulders, the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. Behind them, students were still talking, still processing what they'd witnessed. The story would spread through the school like wildfire, would be told and retold, probably with exaggerations and embellishments. But for Ethan and Maya, it was simple. She'd protected him just like she always did. Just like their father had taught them both to protect those who needed it. And as they walked together through the fading light, Ethan felt something shift inside him. His fear wasn't gone. That would take time, maybe a lot of time. But it was smaller now, manageable, overshadowed by something else. Pride in his sister. gratitude for her strength, and a small, growing seed of his own courage, nurtured by the knowledge that he wasn't alone, that he had someone who would always stand up for him when he couldn't stand up for himself. Someday, he thought, maybe he'd be strong like Maya. Maybe he'd learn to stand tall on his own. But until then, it was okay to let his sister be his shield, because that's what family was for.